So, what if the last 500 years of world history weren't just a series of random, chaotic events? What if it was all part of a single, predictable pattern of power? Well, today we're diving into a really provocative analysis that claims exactly that. It reframes everything from colonialism to modern warfare as just different chapters in one long, continuous story. The entire analysis really kicks off with this pretty stark thesis. It argues that if you really want to understand the global system we live in today, you have to trace its engine back to two really fundamental forces: greed and racism. It's a bold claim for sure, and it's going to frame everything we're about to look at. Okay, so here's the absolute core idea. The source is arguing that history isn't random at all. Instead, it suggests that there's a predictable pattern at play, a kind of blueprint, where all these major global events are actually connected, telling one single story of power and control. So, where does a pattern like this even begin? According to this analysis, you have to go all the way back to the era of direct conquest. This is phase one, the foundation, and it starts with the violent subjugation of indigenous peoples all across the globe. In this first phase, the methods were just brutally direct. The source details this systematic process where land was confiscated by force, extermination campaigns were waged, disease was weaponized, and entire cultures were intentionally wiped out. The result? The complete collapse of civilizations. And from there, the pattern just shifted gears into what we know as classic colonialism. The main method was direct military occupation, and it was all for one primary purpose: to plunder resources. This whole system involved forced labor, the drawing of completely artificial borders that basically guaranteed future conflict, and of course, the brutal suppression of any resistance. And this, the source argues, is what created a world of weak, dependent states. Now, running right alongside all of this was the transatlantic slave trade. And the analysis is completely unflinching here, describing it for exactly what it was: the kidnapping and sale of millions of human beings as if they were commodities. The source really emphasizes the foundational role this played in building the wealth of Europe and the Americas, an economic engine that left these generational wounds that, have never fully healed. Okay, let's jump forward to the 20th century. The source argues the pattern didn't just disappear. No way. It just evolved. Overt, direct conquest started to give way to a new mechanism for reshaping the world: global war. And this marks the second major phase in this whole model. The way the source sees it, the world wars were conflicts that were born in Europe but then exported to the rest of the world. Colonies were completely drained of their resources and their people to fuel the war effort, and military violence on an industrial scale was introduced to literally every corner of the planet. And the outcome? A world map that was forcibly redrawn by the victors. So after World War II, you'd think direct colonialism was over, right? Well, not exactly. The source argues the pattern just shifted again, this time to indirect control. And we see this in the long history of Western-backed coups, the propping up of friendly dictators, and constant military interventions, all of which, it argues, created chronic instability across the global South. And that brings us right up to today, to the modern era. So if direct conquest and proxy wars were the old tools, what does this pattern look like now? Well, the source identifies a whole new toolkit: modern levers of power that achieve pretty much the same goals, just in a different form. This analysis breaks it down into three key levers. First up, modern warfare. It points to conflicts from Vietnam to Afghanistan as examples of excessive force with absolutely devastating civilian tolls. Second, the use of the economy as a weapon. We're talking sanctions that cripple entire populations and debt that creates political leverage. And third, a system of legal double standards. Now, what's really interesting here is how this slide visually breaks down that third point. The source argues that international law is applied unevenly. Allies often seem to get a free pass, they get impunity, while human rights concerns are selectively weaponized against adversaries. And this, it claims, erodes any trust in the entire global system. Now, to make sure this doesn't just sound like some grand, abstract theory, the source grounds its entire argument in some incredibly stark data. So let's take a look at the numbers it presents to try and quantify the human cost of this historical pattern. The data sequence kicks off with one of the most brutal colonial episodes in history: an estimated 10 million deaths in the Congo under Belgian rule. I mean, that figure alone highlights the sheer scale of the violence we're talking about. Next up, the source quantifies the slave trade. It estimates that 12 to 15 million people were forcibly captured and sold.
And that's not even counting the millions more who died during that horrific journey.
And then you get to the cost of exporting conflict on an industrial scale. World War II alone led to as many as 85 million deaths. And the source highlights a really chilling turning point here. For the first time in a major war, civilians were the primary casualties. And this table here is meant to show how that pattern of high death tolls didn't just end in the 20th century. The numbers from Vietnam, Iraq, and Afghanistan are presented as direct evidence of modern warfare's immense human cost, a cost, again, that is still borne primarily by civilians. And the consequences are very much ongoing. The source wraps up its data section with this just staggering number. Over 110 million people are currently displaced by war worldwide, a direct outcome, it argues, of the instability we've been tracing this whole time. So, after all that history, after all those numbers, how does the source tie all of this together? What's the unifying theory that connects conquest, world wars, and modern interventions into one single story? Well, it all boils down to this one simple and, frankly, pretty brutal formula. The analysis argues that we aren't seeing mistakes or accidents in history. What we're seeing is the consistent application of superior power, military dominance, and strategic alliances to reshape the world by force, and it's often at the expense of the most vulnerable. And this just brilliantly illustrates the ultimate question the source leaves us with. It's challenging us, challenging you to look at the world map, to look at global inequality, at ongoing conflicts, and ask yourself, are we just seeing a random series of events? Or are we actually seeing the latest chapter in a very, very old story?